Hey there. Okay. Well, I'm a bit late to the party with this one. About 5 years too late, actually. But I watched Blair Witch from 2016 recently, so I thought I would do a review of it. Honestly, when it came out, I didn't really pay it all that much attention, but I watched a bit of the Blair Witch video game on YouTube recently, and it got me in the mood to watch the movie, and I was pleasantly surprised, shall we say, honestly. Um, Now, the first thing I should probably mention, full confession, I didn't find the Blair Witch Project scary. Probably in a minority with that, but there you have it. It was obviously a phenomenon, the way it was marketed, the amount of buzz it generated, etc. It was incredible, and I enjoyed all of that, and I did enjoy the film. I just didn't find it scary. But then, I don't find horror movies scary generally. Um, the thing with a film like the original Blair Witch Project, though, is that you can only do that kind of thing and make it work that well once. Um, People are too marketing savvy now, and with social media, etc. There's just no way you could capture lightning in a bottle twice, I don't think. But that was one of the things I liked about this one, actually, is that Wingard and Barrett, the director and the writer, they didn't try to remake the original, they tried to do a direct sequel to it, which I think was kind of bold, because how do you do that? Um, well, what they didn't do, ultimately, was what Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows ended up doing. I know, that there was heavy studio interference, and the director's vision didn't make it to the screen, and honestly, it was a disjointed experience. Blair Witch 2, in my view, isn't a particularly great movie, the one that we got. Um, Ultimately, it just seemed to be a cash grab to me, and they wanted to recapture some of what the first one had. But they didn't realize that with a film that's that different in style, really, you can't just bring out, a run of the mill sequel a year later and expect it to blow the house down. Really, it doesn't work like that. Instead, in the 2016 film, we have a sequel to the original, which is an interesting choice, and it's set years after the disappearances of Heather, Mike, and Josh. And I think that works a lot better, honestly. They left it long enough that when people heard that it was coming out, I think it was either a film convention or a Comic-Con or something, there was excitement about it. There was quite a bit of buzz and interest. So, the big point was it going to live up to the legacy of the first one? I don't see how it could, honestly. But again, you had somebody that wanted to write it, somebody that wanted to direct it, and it wasn't purely a cash grab, which I think was in its favour all the way along. Okay, so the story then. As I said, it's set years after the disappearances from the first movie, and we follow Heather's brother James, played by an actor called James Allen McCune. He's haunted by his sister's disappearance, and he's got an alert set up online so that anytime any sort of footage relating to that area, I guess, or the incident is posted, that it notifies him, basically. So he ends up watching some footage, and he sees the Rustin Parr house from the end of the first one, which is interesting, seeing as the search party that went out couldn't find it. He's got a friend there called Lisa with him, who is making a film about his search for closure and the whole phenomenon to an extent. And we get to see some of the equipment they're going to be taking with them, and more people show up at the house. Peter and Ashley, who are friends of Lisa and James. So they start talking, and it turns out that they've arranged to meet the people that uploaded the footage, who just so happen to live in Burkittsville, which is obviously the town from the first film. They all go out that night and get shit-faced, basically, at a club, and talk about what's going to be happening, the order of events, if you like, and what people's motivations are and stuff. You've got Peter and Ashley, who've known James for years, so they're obviously going to be more protective of him than Lisa is, who just wants to make the film, but she still cares about him. So they accept that, and everything remains cool. Cut to, it's the next day, and everybody's hungover. They test all the equipment, the drone, the walkie-talkies that they've got, the radios, and they drive out to Burkittsville to meet these people that have uploaded the footage, who turn out to be this couple called Lane and Talia. They're both quite sketchy dudes. I mean, Lane in particular is a pain in the ass, going about with a camera filming absolutely everything pretty much. And they basically say that if they want to see where they found this footage, they're going to have to take Lane and Talia with them, which sounds a bit dodgy. I mean, yes, they grudgingly agree and they drive out to the woods, but essentially they're putting all their faith in these sketchy people that they've just met. Whether that is believable or not, I guess, it is his sister, James's sister, that's gone missing. So I can see how he would want to go out there and why. Either way, it works. In that moment, it works for the film, and of course, there isn't going to be a film without it. So, they drive out to the woods, they park up, and they start walking into the woods, and we get a similar shot to the one in the original film when they arrive, the party moving away from the car, essentially. Then you get Peter, who's honestly a bit of a prick. He starts pissing Lane and his girlfriend off, sort of taking a piss out of the legend in the area. But we end up getting some of the history, the Rustin Parr house, the Coffin Rock incident, whether Rustin Parr killed the kids in the attic or the basement. Apparently there's some difference of opinion about that, and it's all pretty basic but interesting world building stuff that does come back later on. It ties in to certain things that happen later on in the film, which is kind of cool. Okay, so they get out to the creek that was in the original film that they cross on the log, but these guys just decide to walk through the creek itself, which is, I guess it's okay. They can hang their socks up and stuff after getting their feet wet and what have you. And so they do that, and Ashley ends up hurting her foot. You got James, who's got some medical training, so he provides Ashley with a bit of first aid, and they get her up. And meanwhile, Lane wants to film everything. He's got his camera in Ashley and James's face, so Peter gets a bit nasty with him, which is fair enough. The last thing you want is a fucking camera in your face while you're trying to help somebody that's in pain like that. So we go a bit further into the woods. They set up the camp and launch the drone. And we find out that they're deep in the woods at this point. The scenery's beautiful, but obviously, of course, it's deep in the woods, so they're pretty isolated. Next, we have a kind of a nighttime, the first nighttime scene. And they build a fire, have some food, talk about the alleged witch, Ellie Cadwood, from the first film, and how she got banished, and the idea that she may have been essentially hung from a tree with weights on her limbs like a makeshift rack, which is interesting, and it expands a little bit on the original, which I think is good. And that is kind of a different take. Apparently, there's an idea that she cursed the woods, so that it's more the idea that the woods are tainted rather than her, the witch herself, still being out there. But that you can't look at the witch or you'll die of fright, which is obviously contradictory to her simply tainting the woods and not being there. But it is it's the kind of old school gothic shit that I like in films, and I can't say you don't see it a lot. You see it more, I guess, in found footage movies, usually, than any other sort, but I like the little touches like that. We find out that Peter had gone on the original search party to look for Heather, Josh, and Mike from the first film. And Lane starts joking around and says that it might be the area that's brought him back, kind of. He says that kind of seriously, then he starts playing around a bit for the camera. And then everybody goes to bed in good spirits, seemingly. So, we're at the first night in the woods. We got some weird noises. James, as the leader of the group, I guess, gets up to investigate. Runs into Lisa and we get a jump scare. There's a few of them in the film. Quite a few of them from Talia. A little bit later on, and it turns out that Lane is missing at this point. So James and Talia go looking for him, and it turns out that he was apparently looking for the source of the noises, which is sort of believable, I guess. But again, is it really believable? I don't know, but I mean, it's the kind of thing that happens in these kind of movies, and it works. It works for the film at this point. So the next day, they wake up, and just like in the first film, there are stick figures everywhere. So people are like, oh, I want to go home, this is getting scary, blah, blah, blah. And they notice it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, meaning they've been asleep all night and all morning, which doesn't really make sense. They head back to the car, and Lisa is talking to Lane about his camera, mentioning that it uses tapes, and that those tapes are similar to the ones that they said they uploaded the footage from. So already as an audience we're thinking, uh-oh, something's not right here. That combined with Lane going off on his own the night before and stuff. You know, he's not a trustworthy dude, basically. Then they stop because Ashley's foot is getting worse, and Lisa snatches a rope from Lane's backpack, and they talk about it, and it turns out that Lane himself has made the stick figures, not to be a dick, so he says, essentially, but because he's convinced that the area is supernatural and he wants them to believe it, essentially, so that they'll stay out there and press on, essentially. Some bullshit, I don't know. I mean, of all the things you could do, the state James is in, having lost his sister, it's bullshit. It's a shitty thing to do. So, Peter ends up snapping at them, and he chases them away from the group. They start freaking out that they're going to get lost, but no one really gives a shit, including me, as an audience member. I mean, you just can't fuck with people to that extent and expect them to be okay with it, really, in that situation, with all the emotion of it and all that kind of stuff. So James is understandably pissed off that it's all been bullshit, essentially, from these two. And there's a nice bit of camaraderie between him and Peter before they carry on. So, after this, again, just like in the first film, they walk all day and end up back where they started. They've been in a big loop. Ashley's foot is really getting bad by this point, so they stop and they camp. And of course, the weird noises start again. Peter goes in with Ashley to look at her foot, and it is getting pretty nasty. There seems to be something actually in her foot, and it's looking pretty gross at this point. And she's running a fever, so obviously she's incapacitated, pretty much. So he goes to tell James and Lisa. James has obviously got some sort of medical training. And Lisa tries launching the drone to see where they are. And it turns out they're now deep in the shit. There's not much light left, and there are no roads, no sign of a town, nothing. And then the drone crashes. James goes in and has a look at Ashley's foot, agreeing that it's not looking good and that they need to get her to an emergency room as quickly as possible, basically, as soon as they get back to the world, as it were. Peter goes off to get some firewood and hears some weird noises. He gets chased by something, falls, and a tree ends up landing on him. At which point James can't get hold of him on the radio, so he goes looking for him. Now, for me, the foot thing is effective. I often find body horror to be quite effective, honestly. It's horrible, and it gets worse a little bit later on. And it adds an immediate danger inside the group. It's not just the outside that's dangerous. It's not just, whether there's a witch or whether they're lost and they're completely fucked, whether there's a witch or not. But there's a reason now, a concrete reason that they need to get out of there. So, Lisa and Ashley at this point are still chilling back at the camp. Ashley must be pretty fucking tough, frankly, being back on her feet, walking around on her foot, which is gross. It's not looking good. it's dark and the guys haven't come back yet, so Ashley is wondering where Peter is, understandably. James comes back with Peter's torch, but there's no Peter, and everybody goes to bed, which is kind of strange in my opinion. I mean, Peter, yes, he's a bit of a dick, but he is their friend, and you would think they would have a bit more of a look for him, given that they've got torches and stuff, or at least wait up for a little while. But it's believable that they wouldn't search for him in the dark. I mean, a lot of scary shit is going on. Obviously, in the morning it'll be daylight, and yeah. So they just decide to go to bed and wait till the next day to look for him. So James and Lisa are in one of the tents, talking. They're getting pretty close at this point. There's a little bit of emotional tension, maybe, building up between them. You know, a little bit of a romance, perhaps, or at least the potential for that. And of course, weird noises are still going on, and then we get Lane and Talia showing up again, who, it turns out, have been walking in circles for 5 days, during which the sun hasn't been coming up, and they're both pretty crazy, unkempt, starving, fucked up. So Lane ends up running off pretty much in a panic. Talia comes and has some food by the fire, and James and Lisa go back to bed. Again, why? I mean, if what she says is true, they've been trapped in a very strange supernatural scenario for nearly a week, and they just decide to leave her by herself with a load of weird shit still going on. Is it believable that they're that pissed off from earlier? Maybe. But it doesn't really seem like the right decision to me. But then it's a horror movie, I guess. So without bad decisions, you wouldn't have a movie. So, time passes, and Lisa and James wake up next to each other. Lisa checks her watch, and it's again 2 p.m. of the next day. But it's still dark outside. They open up the tent, and there are piles of rocks outside the door, like in the first film, and the stick figures are back. We get another jump scare from Talia. I think she's given us a couple. Like when they find them, she starts freaking out, and there's a bit of a jump scare. And yeah, so she's looking at the figures, the stick figures, and she finds a hair on one of them, which freaks her out even further. So then Ashley comes out of her tent again. Again, she seems remarkably well and able to walk, given the state of her foot, and she's totally pissed off. Sees Talia, grabs the figure with Talia's hair on and snaps it. Talia immediately falls to the floor, doubled up under herself like a pretzel. The idea being, I suppose, that the stick figure was like a voodoo doll of her, and when it snapped, so did she. And it's a shock when it happens. It's like BAM! So that's kind of cool. More weird noises, and the camp blows completely away. Tents, everything just disappear, and everybody runs screaming into the woods in the other direction, basically. Ashley gets separated from James and Lisa, and all 3 of them are lost at this point. Ashley's foot by now has gotten horrible. I mean, she stops and takes out the dressing, and this ungodly amount of pus and filth just come dribbling out of the wound, along with what's supposed to be a root of some kind, I think, but we don't really get to see it close up. Now, I think it's an effective moment because it produces a visceral reaction and it's realistic in terms of what an infection like that could progress into. So I've got no problem with it. I guess you could say, oh, it's just horrible to be horrible, but no, I think there is a point to it. Really, it adds kind of to the realism of it a little bit. Meanwhile, James and Lisa are still looking for Ashley and Peter, and they hear Peter say, "Help me," like "Help me," over the radio. And then shit starts happening again, and they're running further off into the woods. At this point, we get the first, what I call Heather moment. Now, there are three of these, and I call them Heather moments because it reminds me of that amazing solo to the camera that Heather Donahue does in the first film. We've got close-ups back and forth trying to comfort each other, and they pause for a little bit, try and collect themselves a little bit, and they're back searching for Ashley again. By this point, Ashley has somehow found the drone that crashed, and she was saying back at the camp that she wanted to take it up and look for Peter and blah blah blah, but it's crashed. So she goes up the tree that it's stuck in to try and get it back. Basically, it takes her a while. She tries to grab it, but ends up missing her footing and falls to the floor and gets dragged off by something. So we know for certain that there is someone or something out there. That it's not just weird noises and people's imagination at this point. We cut back to Lisa and James, who are still looking for her and Peter, and they hear a scream. So again, they're running right into the Rustin Parr house. And now the film starts speeding up, shall we say. We've got Lisa now, who absolutely doesn't want to go into the house, which is fair enough. I certainly wouldn't. But James is saying that finding the place is the whole reason that he's come here, to see if he can find Heather. So he goes in by himself. Is it believable that he'd be running around this place after everything that's happened? I guess it depends how desperate he is. And inside, it's similar to the first film. I mean, it's just running around with a camera, but the house is more of a character than it was in the first one. It's a lot more extensive. We see a lot more of it. James looks into one of the rooms and sees Peter standing in a corner, who then vanishes. He sees a running female figure who he thinks might be Heather, and we get a few flash images of this character throughout the house as James is running round. I guess he just doesn't want to leave without knowing. I mean, if you're in that state, is it believable? Probably. From one perspective, probably not from another, but again, it's a film. And anyway, back outside, Lisa is still calling Ashley. She's hearing weird noises and screams, and it's raining and shit, so she ends up freaking out and she runs into the house after James. She's calling him, shit like that. Goes down to the basements and finds Lane, who's gone completely mad by now. And we get a feeling that he's been down there for a hell of a long time. He shoves her through a trapdoor in the floor where there are some tunnels, which I mentioned earlier when they're talking about the legend. It's mentioned that there were tunnels leading to nothing beneath Rustin Parr's house. So Lisa starts crawling through them and ends up getting stuck briefly before essentially crashing through the side of the house back into the house. Lane is there and he's still completely nuts and tries to attack her, but she kills him, which is fine. I mean, she's freaked out, he's crazy, she's protecting herself. I got no issue with that. Now the speed ramps up even further. Lisa's running upstairs and we catch a glimpse of a creature. Now, according to the filmmakers, we don't get to see the Blair Witch in the film. So my guess is that this thing is meant to be like a gestalt entity. Like a combination of all the shit that's happened in the house, maybe in the woods as a whole, since Ellie Kedwood's death. I don't know, but if it's not the witch, then it's gotta be the amalgamation of something, or maybe something she raised, or something. Maybe it's like a summoned creature, but I don't think so. I think it's just everything that's happened is sort of condensed into this one creature. The look of it is okay, and I think they needed to show something after everything that's been going on, but I'm not entirely sure that this was the right design for it, honestly. It's a little bit... I guess it's okay because you see so little of it, put it that way. But I think that it's a little bit too... it looks like a horror movie creature, basically, which is a hard thing to get right, showing the audience something they haven't seen before, I suppose. Anyway, she keeps running, looking for James, and finds him in the attic. And they get a strange light passing by outside. And they wonder what it is, but by the time they start thinking about it, the creature is coming, and you get these screeching, growling noises and stuff being smashed up, so they're both freaking out, basically. We get another Heather moment, with James apologising for the shit they're in, and how it's all his fault, and blah blah blah. And he starts talking to what he thinks is Heather. So then we get what I think, personally, is probably the best line in the film from Lisa. And she says, "Who are you talking to?" Because, she can't hear anybody else up there. And it's just the way she says it. There's something childlike and scared about it. I just think it's very effective. Then we get more crashing about and snarling. James, I guess, goes off to look for Heather to see if it is her or not. And we get the last Heather moment, if you will, with Lisa on her own staring into the camera, but she's got herself off center so that we as the audience and she as the character can actually see what's happening behind her in the viewfinder screen. And so we get another flash of the creature, and then she's freaking out again. And we hear James say that he's sorry again in almost exactly the way he said it a moment ago. And Lisa goes to turn, she gets hit, the camera hits the floor and starts getting covered with rain, and the film ends with this rather peaceful, rather beautiful shot. I guess it's a similar juxtaposition of tone that the first film has at the end. Just goes still and silent, and, well, not silent, I mean, you got the noise of the rain, but we get the credits after that. It goes to black, and we get the credit. Okay, well, that's the story then, essentially. One thing I can say is that it's a very dense film. I tried to do a short review of it, and I think this is going to end up being the longest one I've done. It definitely bears repeat viewings, as there are things that characters say and do that have significance later on. mainly to do with the lore dumps from Lane and Talia early on. And when the camera glitches, the digital glitch, there are images from the film in some of the glitches, and I don't know if they were going for this. It kind of maybe adds to the time dilation feel of the whole thing, which is a brilliant use of digital glitch. I like digital glitch myself, certainly as much as when film goes hazy or starts going to white noise or suddenly cuts off or whatever. It's not as tactile, but it's just creepier to me somehow. I'm not sure why. But as I said earlier, I don't often find horror movies all that scary. But there's something about this one that got me. I don't know if it's the tone, the casting, the production, the setting. Maybe it was the body horror, which, like I said earlier, often gets me. But I found it scarier than the original, if I'm honest. Again, probably in a minority there, but I thought it was a solid film, and I can totally recommend it for fans of the horror genre, particularly the found footage subgenre, and people who are into the whole Blair Witch thing, the mythos. And as I said, pleasant surprise. I was surprised that I actually liked the film, frankly. Of course, there are some unanswered questions, and some of the choices and motivations of the characters don't seem entirely realistic. Some of the things don't make sense, given their characters and how they're set up. But obviously, it's an extreme situation that they're in, and you get that kind of thing in so many horror films that I don't really know if it's even a criticism at this point, honestly. Either way, if you like this type of film, you're probably going to enjoy it, in my opinion. Yeah. So that was my review of Blair Witch 2016. I appreciate that it's a long review, and thank you for making it this far if you have, and I hope that you enjoyed it. And as always, and with all the above being said, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will speak to you soon. Bye for now.